explore every opportunity you can. So even if you are dead set on being an academic, still have a look at other things. Like there are a lot of short courses you can do, like even if you don't have something in your PhD that you think could be commercialized.
Hello and welcome to PhD Talk Show. Today we have with us CEO and co-founder of Metallobio, Kirsty Smitten. Welcome to the show, Kirsty. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us about what you have done and about your educational background?
Yeah, hello, I'm Kirsty. I'm CEO and co-founder of Metallobio, and I did a PhD in chemistry and microbiology at the University of Sheffield, and that was a multidisciplinary PhD that involved making a new set of drugs and then also testing them within bacterial species.
That's great. As I can see that you have done masters in chemistry and you ended up doing PhD in chemistry and microbiology. So that's little bit transition to biology. So how you got interested in microbiology?
Yeah, so I think in my PhD so I was a chemist by background, and actually in my degree, in my fourth year, I did a metals in medicine module, and that was the first time I'd actually really known about metals in medicine other than cisplatin, and we looked at new cancer. It was mostly on cancer, but it was new cancer therapeutics within that metals in medicine area, and from that I decided that's what I wanted to do my PhD in. So I looked at originally potential oncology PhDs, looking at ruthenium compounds for oncology. So actually got offered a PhD at Warwick, at Durham, and in Sheffield, originally all working on ruthenium-based compounds, slightly different ones for oncology. So for ovarian cancer and then for bladder cancer. And then my supervisor at Sheffield said that he'd been awarded another project, and it was to look at, so those projects I was mostly going to be doing just synthesis, and then I'd be handing the compound over to a biological group that would do the testing. And this other project that my supervisor told me about was for antimicrobials. So we basically were looking at a new class of antimicrobials and originally looking at them for gram-positive infections. And so with that one, I was going to be taught microbiology as well. So it was a multidisciplinary project, and it was also a DTP, so a doctoral training program or partnership. And it meant that you get a lot of other skills in that program. So we did a lot of work with the BBSRC on improving your career profile. So we basically did a 3-month placement away from science so that you got skills that were in something different if you didn't want to carry on in science. So I think that PhD on a whole looked better for me. So I decided to go with that one. I know my supervisor because he was my personal tutor, so I felt comfortable working under him as well. So I think the supervisor, a tip for people who want a PhD, I think it's really, really, really vital to have a good supervisor relationship. Some supervisors work their students very hard, and that's not how I work well. Like I work well basically working for myself. So I think getting that relationship right is really fundamental to having a good PhD. So I think if you have an interview with a PhD supervisor and you can't see yourself getting along with them, I don't think that's a very good idea to do a PhD under them. I think you'll be very unhappy. So yeah, all of those fed the basis for me choosing that project.
Yeah, thanks. I think you touched upon different aspects one should be like taking care during PhD, and one of them is mentorship.
Yeah.
So do you think that mentorship played a role when you moved from, say, chemistry to cancer biology and then to microbiology? What was the role of mentorship?
Yeah, so I originally was looking at staff, and in that research group that I went into, I didn't feel very supported. So like I'd never done biology. Like see, I had an A level, but I'd never done like practical biology, and I was dropped into a microbiology lab where it was expected that I knew how to do everything, and I'd never cultured bacteria before, so I was like a bit lost. It kind of put me off it a bit. But I worked it out. I had someone helping me, and a little bit, not a lot, and then kind of taught myself. And then a couple of weeks into my PhD, my supervisor presented at a talk in Sheffield called Shamrock. And we actually met another group in Sheffield that were working on gram-negative bacteria. And at the time, they said, do you want to test your compounds like on our bacterial strains? And we did, and they actually worked better, which then resulted in a diversion in my PhD. So I went from working in the staff lab, and I still did work in there, but I moved more into the other lab. And at that point, I met someone called Hannah, who basically was my mentor throughout my PhD. I don't think I'd have my company without her. I don't think my PhD would be so successful without her. And I think she was really vital. So she taught me everything. She's not like micromanaging me, because I don't like being micromanaged, but she taught me like everything I know in terms of microbiology, even up to the point of invertebrate model testing. So I picked up what I consider a lot of skills during my PhD, and most of them were taught by Hannah. So I think having that mentorship from Hannah, and then also from Jim, my supervisor, was really vital for me to get to the point that I got to. I think in terms of my supervisor as well, he's very much for you. Like, he very much wants you to succeed. And I think that's key. So like everything I was offered, and I can talk about that a bit later, but I was offered a lot of things to do whilst I was doing my PhD. So I ended up taking a couple of secondments, one that resulted in the company forming, and then another was a research assistant position. So bit of a step up. But I was offered in my second year of my PhD a research assistant position, research associate position, sorry. It was the first time they'd offered one to someone that hasn't qualified as a PhD student yet. But basically it was to look at in vitro PK testing for drugs. So it was to pick up skills that would help my PhD. And Jim let me take 3 months off my PhD to go and work on this project, and that didn't benefit him in any way, but he knew that it benefited me and it looked good for me. So I had a supervisor that was very much, and still is as a co-founder in my company, very much supportive of me succeeding. And I think that's kind of key. Like everything, he wants all of his students to succeed, and don't want to big him up too much, but all of his students have succeeded. We all have very good careers, and I think that's partly why, because I think he's such a big part in everything, and I think that's been key. Like I think getting that relationship is key, and also like making use of everyone around you, because people do want to help. And I think don't be scared to ask for help if you don't know how to do something, or if you want to pick up a new skill, people will help you.
I think, yeah, you touched upon like many aspects of mentorship, and I think you were one of the luckiest one to find a
Yeah.
good mentor. Yeah. So you touched upon that you moved on starting a startup after your PhD. So what were the skills you gained during your PhD, or what were the short courses you took during your PhD that helped you in getting the courage to start your own startup?
Yeah, so I think this is where I think there's where a fault lies within the PhD system in the UK. Is I think in your PhD you kind of go into it with this mentality of you're going to make, do your research, have your viva, maybe have a few papers, pass, and then go into a research associate position, or maybe move into industry. But you don't think the thing that I'm making right now or doing right now in my PhD is going to end up in a medical perspective in the clinic. Like you wouldn't go initially into your PhD and think I'm making this because it's going into the clinic, unless you're funded by a company for your PhD. And I think that mindset, or the ability to know that can happen, should be taught earlier on. I think like some people just are entrepreneurs, it's just in their nature, but I think some people could be if they knew it was a possibility. And I think getting that clear earlier on is key. So with me, wasn't really taught anything through the university. I was again another mentor. I think I've been very lucky. So I was again. I have a very supportive COO in my company, and he was my technology transfer officer. And we filed for a patent through the university for the technology, and he was very, very proactive on getting me onto commercialization schemes. So I think he saw something in me that would be good, basically, for a spin out. The tech's good, and I think he saw that CEO mentality in me. So he basically set me up on a lot of courses, which have been vital for us spinning out. So the first one was just a 3-month market discovery program. So it was supposed to be part-time, but because it happened for me during COVID and I wasn't in the lab, I could do a lot more than part-time on it. And basically it's called the Lean Launch Program, but it's now been taken over by ICURe. So Innovate UK have taken it over, and they have 4 different tiers of ICURe now. One is market discovery, one is going out and basically validating your idea with customers, and then the other is the process of spinning out and securing money funding for that. So the format's changed a little bit, but the programs are still there. And Lean Launch, we went out to the marketplace and spoke to, I think it was around 50 different potential customers and partners. So you get some funding to go to trade shows and events, and also they teach you in that program. There's a two-day intensive boot camp, and they teach you how to engage with potential customers and partners, because I think that was the one thing I was worried about. I didn't know what I should email, if you cold email, whether it's better to go through LinkedIn, whether it's better to have a personal connection. Really, I found from all my time now that it's better to have a warm introduction. So if you know someone that knows someone, it's better than if you just cold email. Cold emailing has worked a couple of times, but it doesn't work on most of the time. It's one of those things where you have to send 100 emails out and maybe you get 1 or 2 that respond. So the Lean Launch allowed us to see that there was a market for our tech. So our tech being a new antimicrobial drug at that time. But then when we went through Lean Launch, we actually realized that there was a need for new antibiotics to be incorporated into coatings for medical devices as well. A lot of antibiotics can't penetrate biofilms, and they're the main problem on medical devices, and ours can. So we've got a real niche to be able to go into coatings for medical devices. So not only did that program validate the technology that we had, but it also opened up doors for other markets that we could go into. So at the end of that program, you go onto an options roundabout, and it's basically a pitch. You pitch to a panel of experts, and they recommend what you should do, whether you should go on to the next step of ICURe or whether you need to do some more work in the lab. So we were told to go on to the next step of ICURe. So at that point, Jim let me take another secondment from my PhD, and for 4 months you're paid by ICURe. So the previous one, because it's part-time and you still get your PhD salary, you're not paid, but for this one they pay you're paid at research associate wage, which is quite nice, for 4 months, and you do exactly what you did before, but you get £35,000 to go to trade shows, to basically go around the world. That's what most people do on ICURe. Unfortunately, mine was in COVID again, so I didn't get to go around the world. But I should have gone to 2 trade shows in America, one in Australia and then another in Germany. So you really do get to go everywhere. And we spoke to over 150 people this time. Again, looking at the drug, but also at the coating side of things, and basically validated the tech again, but also got customers this time. So it went really, really well this time, and we had 2 commercial partners that were really interested on the coating side of things, and we're still working with them to this day. So I think that's where ICURe kind of really came into its own, and we realized this is where we have a spin out, basically. Like we knew we had a spin out. We had to go through the process of pitching again to an options roundabout, but we were recommended to spin out. And that whole process, you learn so many things. So you go from being a PhD student that's got no experience of any of this to suddenly engaging from a commercial perspective with business development managers, sometimes CEOs, and we spoke to a lot of funding bodies, we spoke to a lot of key opinion leaders, and you kind of pick up skills you couldn't dream of picking up in your PhD. And even if you don't go on to spin out, it's massive for your CV as well. Like the different skill set that you get is insane compared to before. You also learn how to pitch. So whilst I've given numerous academic talks, a pitch is very different to an academic talk. You go from being very scientific to quickly being not scientific and commercially based, and it's learning those things, and that was fundamental to us ending up forming the spin out.
Yeah, wow. So that's a
A lot
lot.
of information. Yeah.
That's a lot for a PhD. So I think nowadays, like all of us talk about mental health. So how you cope up with that, considering like you were doing a lot, you were doing short courses, at the same time you finished your PhD within 4 years or so. So what was your strategy when you were doing the PhD?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a funny one for me. So I technically could have finished my PhD in 2 years. So we got went it was a very weird PhD. So very luckily, like it worked pretty quickly, and we got a significant amount of data in the couple of years. But because I took what ended up being 3 or 4 secondments, so I took a secondment for my PIPS placement, so the one where I did something away from my PhD. So I did science communication for that one, and then I did the uh, research associate position, and then the lean launch and the ICURe. So I ended up being a lot longer. And then at the end, when I was forming the company, I was still writing my thesis. So it was balancing a lot of things. And I think mental health, I think, is bad amongst PhD students. I think again that can play on the type of PhD that you have. So I think my mental health probably didn't struggle as much as a lot of people because I worked hard, but I worked hard because I wanted to work hard, not because the person above me was driving me to work numerous hours a day and like do basically it came into that way where I think you need to be in an environment where you're working under someone that works the same way as you. Like I work very much, I'm driven myself, and if someone starts to micromanage, then I just will not want to do it because I like thinking out things in my own head. And I think it's getting that nailed down kind of help with my mental health. But it's stress. I think the worst part is stress, and that feeds into the CEO as well. I think CEO mental health is awful. I think it's something like 65% of CEOs have mental health problems, and it's just because you especially going from a PhD to a CEO, I think is bad because you kind of have an imposter syndrome. I'll go to pitching events and I'll be the youngest person there by 30 or 40 years. I'll also be one of the only females in the room, and it's really intimidating. You kind of get this should I be here kind of thing. And like I've done a lot, and I know that I've validated my position in my company, but I think people do question it from the outside, like, oh, how she got that position when she's only 28 years old. And I think that kind of comes into play in your head and knocks you down a little bit. And then it's the stress of, do I know what I'm doing? I've come straight out of a PhD. Do I know what I'm doing? Like, you have to make sure that you've got the funding, and it's not only the funding for yourself and your job, but also the people that you're responsible for underneath you and your staff. And I think it's bad. And I think that's where I did have another a job idea, another business idea. I think that's where there's a lot of apps out there for mental health, for doctors, for nurses, for a lot of different healthcare, like lot of different career positions now. But I don't think there's a lot of support for CEOs. If you seek it yourself, then obviously you can get it, but I don't think it's there. And I think as a PhD student, it is and it isn't. Like I think at one point in my PhD, I did get I think it was when it fed into COVID. So during COVID, I think I did get a bit depressed, and I don't know if it was because I think it's because I'm like quite a sociable person, and I went to living on my own, and I lived quite a bit away from Sheffield, and it was like I've gone from seeing my friends every day in the lab because we all got along in the lab to just not seeing anyone for a long time, and I think that was difficult. But other than that, in my PhD, I was supported by a group that we all got along, and that was, I think, key as well. And Hannah, who I said about who was my mentor, she also was incredible for my mental health, I think. So like a lot of stressful things I would talk to her about. And I think if you can find that person during your PhD that you can confide in, that's probably really helpful. The university do have mental health support. Just don't think I ever tapped into it, but I think it is there. I think it's becoming the forefront a lot more of companies and of universities. I think people are being more aware of mental health needing to be supported more than it is.
Yeah, I think your journey is quite motivational and inspiring. You have a lot to say, but I think before we wrap up, one key message for PhD students who are at the end of finishing their PhD and trying to explore new opportunities.
Yeah, I think explore every opportunity you can. So even if you are dead set on being an academic, still have a look at other things. Like there are a lot of short courses you can do. Like even if you're not, even if you don't have something in your PhD that you think could be commercialized, you could still speak to people like me who are willing to give up our time. Young CEOs who've done the same journey as me are always willing to give up time to speak to people about our journey. I talk to people quite a lot on that and how I made the company. I think reaching out to people. I think before I did this job, I was quite scared of just approaching random people, but now, like I've realized, even through LinkedIn, which is the best platform for networking, even through like just LinkedIn, you everyone is there to help. I think some people won't, but I think the majority of people will be willing to give up half an hour of their day just to have a quick video call to talk you through how they did what they did. So I think that would be the best thing to do.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing your PhD journey and uh, tips for students who are trying to explore now different job opportunities. Thanks a lot once again.
Thank you.